What's up, nerds? My name is Cory Bergeron. You are watching Cory Bergeron Recordings, and we're back with a brand new video, and this is another In the Mix video. In the Mix is a video series I have on this YouTube channel where I jump into the Pro Tools session of a song that I worked on. In this case, I produced, engineered, and mixed this song, and this song is called In the Open by Familiar Spaces. Familiar Spaces is from Rhode Island. They came up here at the end of January. We recorded a handful of songs, and this is the first single that they released from that recording session. It came out last week, and the response has been pretty good. So as I mentioned, in front of me, I have the Pro Tools session, so I'm going to give you a quick overview of what we're looking at, and then we will start jumping into specifics. Okay, so at the top of the session here, we have the drums here in red. Below that, in purple, we have the drum effects. Underneath that, we have the aux percussion, so there's shakers, tambourines, all that stuff. Below that in yellow, we have the bass. In this green all the way down to this orange, this is the different guitars. We have rhythm guitars, lead guitars, and then the acoustic guitars. I also have the vocals and the vocal effects below that. And then at the very end of the session, we have the production effects, if you will. And everything here routes to a drum master, a bass master, a guitar master, a vocal master, which lead to the final mix. Let's talk about the drums. The drums were tracked by my friend Joey Demers. He was hired to play drums on this project because the drummer of the band actually quit weeks before the recording sessions started. The band emailed me and said, "Yo, we lost our drummer, we can maybe play the parts." And I was like, "Don't you worry, we can get Joey in charge of this." Joey's a phenomenal drummer. I've recorded him a million times. He understands both sides of the glass, the performing part as well as the recording part, which makes my job very easy. And if you know me, you know that nailing the drums is very important. Now, this track is a emo rock song, if I were to have to label it. There's obviously some pop rock or pop punk elements to it. It's a catchy emo song, and normally when I record a song like this, I will record it in a large live room. There's two big studios in the city that I would normally record these drums at, but I felt like the songs needed some work, and I thought it was a good idea to work on the songs all at one location so we can record any part of the project at any time. Joey ended up tracking all 5 songs in one day, and yeah, the guy's an absolute monster. So these drums are actually tracked in a very small live room, which provides some challenges, and I will show you how I address them. But first, you need to listen to the song. If you have not listened to the song, I highly recommend to go do so. It will make all of this make sense. So there is a link at the top of the description. Click on it, listen to the song, and then come back. Actually do it. It matters. Okay, so if we are looking at the drums, I'm just going to switch to the mix window here. These are the drum audio tracks, all of this here, and the reason why there's 2 different colors of red is because the darker red is actually a sample. So I've actually made samples of the kick, the snare, the toms, a rim sample, like a rim shot on a snare drum, and then there's actually a crash sample as well, and I will get to all of it. But as you can see, there is no original kick audio track, and that is because when I was mixing this track, I could not for the life of me get the real kick drum to work. There's 2 kick samples here. One is a direct kick sample, and then one is like a room or overhead sample. This is what they sound like. This is what the direct kick sample sounds like. And this is what the overhead and room sample sound like. Together. You get the picture. It sounds like a kick drum. I really like using overhead samples versus room samples on kick drums. I just think they add like a nice 3D sound to the kick drum without occupying too much space in the mix. Let's keep moving forward. So we have the real snare drum here. And if I'm being honest, I think the actual snare trigger is blended in a lot more in this mix than the real snare drum. But let me show you what the real snare drum sounds like with no processing. So it's a little lifeless, that's for sure. Let me throw these plugins back on it. You can hear that it's gated super hard, and I'm going to be honest with you, I don't think that snare sounds incredible by any means, and that's probably why I relied so heavily on the sample. Let me play the 2 together. And just the sample by itself. So yeah, I think the two of them together kind of give you the full representation of a snare drum. It's fat, it's aggressive, it snaps, as well as there's some room from the sample that adds a nice, third dimension to the track. Ideally, when I record drums, I like to use as much of the organic drum as possible. But for whatever reason, while I was mixing this, I couldn't get that snare to work the way I wanted to. So in that case, you just rely on a sample and you move forward. All right, so up next we have the hi-hat here. And if you look at the audio of the hi-hat, you can see that there is a bunch of audio missing. And that is because I cut out all of the parts where there's no hi-hat being hit. I love having a hi-hat mic. I love having a ride mic. I think it gives you a lot of flexibility in the mix to get the hi-hat on one side, the ride on the other side, and to get like a nice full tone of that individual element. But I do not like the bleed, and I don't like the idea of trying to automate when there's no hi-hats being hit. It sounds like a lot of work. So what I do is I go through once, I cut out all of the bleed, consolidate it, and I never think about it ever again. So this is what the hi-hat sounds like. There's no real science behind that. I used a Shure SM7B. I love using 7Bs on hi-hats. You can see that there's no processing on this hi-hat, and that is because I recorded all the drums through an SSL console that had EQs going into it. So the way I normally process a hi-hat is I just take the low cut or high pass filter knob and I turn it all the way up. Usually goes up to 350 hertz. And I find just cutting out all that low end and all that like 200 hertz where like a snare drum would be in the bleed helps just make the hi-hat sound like a hi-hat. I did that on the way in, so I didn't have to do any processing in post. There's not too much to a hi-hat. As long as you have a good sounding hi-hat that's performed properly, most of the work is already done. Let's move forward to the toms here. These are the toms that are recorded, and if you look at them really quickly, you can see that I did the same thing that I did to the hi-hat. I cut out everything that was not a tom hit, and I actually edit very, very tight on these toms. I'm not too concerned about the bleed. I like the tom to be hit. I like you to hear the initial attack, and then I like it to get out of the way. So here are a couple tom hits. On them I just have EQ and a little bit of compression. Yeah, a little compression on the floor tom. I found that the low end on the tom was a little like weird and inconsistent. So I used this earth EQ, which is like a low cut, and I just made a little bit of a resonant frequency at 80 hertz to kind of control where the low end is hitting. I do like using this virtual channel and cranking the drive on it. It sounds nice on snares and toms. For some reason, I'm using this multi-band transient designer. I don't normally go for that, but for whatever reason, I decided to on this, and then I'm also clipping the toms, which I like to do on toms and snares. Just helps them sit properly. And I'm also using samples on the toms, and let's give those a quick listen. So you can hear that the samples are just room samples. And altogether we have... sounds kind of funny. But the samples almost add the decay to the toms that I've cut out, but they also added a little bit of a 3D, makes the toms sound like they were actually performed in a large live room. What I think is really important about getting these tom samples to sit right is to get the panning the exact same as the actual tom microphones. It makes your 3D field sound consistent, which is good. And let's keep moving forward. Up next we have the ride. The ride is like the hi-hat. I cut out all the junk, and all we have is where the ride hits are. There's really nothing to that ride microphone. It's just nice because I can pan it in one direction and get a really nice accurate 3D sound of the drum kit. Let's move forward to the overheads. The overheads to me were very problematic. I did not like the way that the overheads recorded, and that is my own fault, but listen to all these ringing frequencies in here. So this is just the raw overheads. It's honestly not the end of the world listening back to it now, but I found when I was listening to it in the mix, there was tons of frequencies that were ringing out, occupying space in the guitars, and I might have gone a little bit overboard, but I ended up cutting out a bunch of just things that were bothering me, that were taking up space. One thing that I generally like doing, especially if I have room microphones, is I like to pan the overheads 80% instead of 100%. I find they sit a little bit behind the guitars in some weird way, which really helps the 3D like drums, bass, vocals, and guitars. And it's a little subtle detail, but to me it does make a difference. So there are the overheads. Let me play them with all of my over processing on it. Okay, obviously that sounds way different, and that's because I also cut out all the low end in my overheads, like all the way up to 500 hertz. And that's because I just want these overheads to be cymbals. That's all I care about. I just want them to be capturing the cymbals. So let me play the drums up until that point. I'll throw the effects on too, which I'll talk about in a second, without the rooms. So just so you can kind of hear what this all sounds like. So you can hear in context that the fact that it's just like thin cymbals is actually sits decently. Now this is where I think we tie the entire drum kit together, and that's where I throw in these room microphones. Normally when I record rooms in a small room, I end up throwing them away a lot of times, or I can't get them to work, or I compress the hell out of them and just like bleed them in a little bit. But for whatever reason, I decided that I would try to make these rooms work, and I'm glad I did, because I think they add a lot to the drum sound. They really just make the whole drum sound work. This is kind of the glue that helps everything fit together. So let's talk about the processing real quick. I have this Q10. You can see that nothing's happening here, but I'm just using it to turn up the right side volume a little bit, just to get the snare sounding level in both sides. Then I'm throwing a reverb on it, which is the IRL, I believe, and it's just on the Hall preset, and I've turned it at 50%. So this is just to make it sound like it's in a bit of a bigger room. And then I'm cutting out some of the lows and one annoying frequency. And all that together, this is what the rooms sound like. Let me turn off that reverb. You can hear how tiny this room is. All it is cymbals and a dry snare and kick. This might be the secret weapon that's making everything work together. Just having a little bit of snare decay on a 50% blended reverb on the room microphones. Let's hear all the drums together, all the effects, everything. Let me take that stereo pair of rooms out. So the room mics are kind of washing as they do, and there's a lot of ugliness in them, but I think they just like really make everything sit together properly. I think without those room mics, our drum mix would sound worse. So glad I recorded room mics. Let's keep moving down the line here. Keep going through the audio. We have a rim trig here, which is just a sample of a snare rim shot, and it's just to fortify the rim shot that's actually there. Nothing crazy there. There's this track called Rim Effects, and this is just some transitional effect I made out of a fake rim shot. Call that production effects. Cool. And then below that we have this crash cymbal, and this is something I like to put on any like explosive part of the song, any chorus. It's a double crash. You don't need a whole lot of it. That just makes the ones hit harder, so I'll put that on a chorus every single time. It just makes big parts sound big. Let's play all of that together one final time. Cool, so you get the idea there. Let's just talk about these reverbs very quickly. So I have a snare verb, which is this little plate, and I've cut out some of the low end, but it is remarkably dark. This is not what I normally go to. I think, again, as I was struggling to try and make this small drum room sound like a big drum room, I was going through a million different things, and this is just what I happened to land on. So you can hear that it's doing a lot. It's really making the snare sound fat, and it sounds like a healthy amount of reverb, but for whatever reason, it does work. I have a tom reverb that I throw on as well, and I know this is not super normal. We're not in the 80s here, but I like to sometimes have a tom reverb. A lot of times I end up not using it, but I felt for this it was appropriate. Yeah, just adds like some thickness to it, similar to what it does in the snare. Kind of gets the snare and the toms playing in the same room. Then on top of that, I'm using even more reverb. Can you believe it? What year is it? We have a drum reverb, and all of these drums here are sent to this track called Drum Aux, which is this guy here, and this is being sent to the drum reverb, and that is going, yeah, to that drum reverb track. So the whole drum kit is getting processed with reverb, which is Not something you see very often. And the drum reverb only has a 0.7 second decay, so it's very little. It's just to add a little bit of room to it, and I think that it does add a positive thing to it, so let that slide. And then lastly, we have this thing called decomp, which is just the drum parallel compression. So I have the kick, the snare and the snare sample, the tom and the tom samples, and the rim trigger sample all being sent, and it is just hitting this LA2A super hard, clipping it, and that is making the kick and snare and everything slam. So pretty straightforward. I use this on every single drum mix. That parallel compression, it adds a lot. That was definitely a game changer when I started doing that a while back. So that is it for the drums for the most part. Let's see what we have on the drum master real quick here. On the drum master, we have this Kramer tape. This is actually helping everything kind of glue together. I don't use this very often, but I tried using it and I actually really enjoyed it, so that stayed on. The VMR usually stays stock on the drum kit. I decided that the drum performance as a whole could use a little bit more 10K, and then I also decided that it could use some of this thickness knob here. It's on the British setting and the drive is cranked. And JST clip, I like throwing this on the entire drum master. Just helps the drums punch. You can see here that we have this decapitator and this EQ plugin that are bypassed, and that's because they automate on in the second verse here. It's just kind of an effect. Just an effect to help it transition. Okay, so up next we have this aux percussion, and it consists of everything that you see here in this baby blue. We have a cymbal swell up here, we have the tambourine, we have a shaker, and we have this thing called Santa, which is just bells. Sounds like Christmas. These samples are the same samples I've used on many sessions. I've just recycled them. I get them to fit with the song, and 9 out of 10 times we end up just leaving them because they sound good. It's something that adds a lot to a production, but it isn't really important if it's a brand new shaker recording. Ultimately, it does get kind of quantized and like fixed into time, so I often recycle using the exact same samples. Oh well, sue me, but I think they sound good, and that's that. So let me just play some of this so you can see what's going on. We have here in this drum pre-chorus part, I'll play all the drums together, and the aux percussion. You can see how it enhances this part. You get the idea. In the chorus on the second half, just on the second half, we figured that it could use the arrangement lift of having a tambourine, so this is what that sounds like. And then just a cymbal swell, and I think this is really stretched into time, so this sounds a little janky, but it works. Transition effects, whatever it takes. Okay, so that's it for aux percussion. Usually when I'm working on a track, I will just start throwing this in at any point. I might have thrown that in while we were even structuring the song out because it just adds a little bit. It helps you see the final picture quickly. So I leave these samples on tap, and I will just pull them in whenever I need them. And oftentimes they stay there all the way to the end. Okay, so let's move on to bass. This bass is here in the yellow, and we have a bass DI, which is called bass low, and then we have a bass amp, and this is actually a real amplifier, which is usually not the case. So let's talk about this. We recorded the bass using a Squier jazz bass, and the jazz bass had upgraded pickups. They brought it in, it sounded pretty decent, and we ended up using it. So there was actually 3 of us that played bass on this EP. There was myself, and then there was Evan, and there was Mike, and we all picked differently. We all have a different style, and I felt that after we tracked the first song that there was like little parts that were a little toony, just like, you know, trying to get the right intensity, hitting the strings and stuff. So what we did with each track is after we recorded it, I would go through and I actually melodined the entire bass track, the DI track, and I only recorded a DI track. While I was recording it, I used a distressor, so we record DI bass with a distressor through a Neve preamp, then I would go through and I'd melodine it, and then after we did that for all 5 songs, I took that bass performance and I ran it through a Fender Bassman, and that Fender Bassman sounds like this. So it just sounds like a rock bass. It's got that chimey grittiness to it. I really like the characteristic of the Fender bass amp. Now something that I think is pretty interesting is we actually recorded the DI going back into the Fender Bassman reamped, but on certain parts we wanted a little bit more hair and a little bit more balls on it. So what we did is I actually used a Rat distortion pedal plugin on the DI going into the amp. So I used a plugin as a distortion pedal going into an amp, and then that gave us this as a result. Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting. I've never done bass like that. It takes a lot more time, but it was all with the importance of just trying to get it to sound good with what we had. And yeah, I think we did that. Now, when I recorded the Fender Bassman amplifier, I wasn't too concerned about how much low end it had. I think I mic'd it up with a 57 because I knew that I'd be doing a split bass technique. So I'm using the DI here to create all the low end, all that thunder, and I'm just using the top end of the bass amp to get my bass tone. So together we have this. This is what the low end sounds like. And this is what the top end sounds like. So that's basically it for the bass. Kind of an interesting and unique way of approaching it, but whatever it takes to get it done right. Okay, so that moves us into the guitars. And what is interesting about the guitars for me is this is one of the first projects where I don't know if we ended up using a real guitar amp, and if we did, it's only for like 1 or 2 parts. So let me go through it with you. Okay, so we have this intro guitar, and now that I just said that, I think that this intro guitar is actually a real guitar amp. So this might be the only real guitar amp on the actual song. Let me play it for you. This intro part is supposed to be like lo-fi, so I've thrown an SSL EQ on it and just turned the high cut and the low cut all the way up. And this is the effect you get. So you get the idea. Okay, so let's talk about the main rhythm guitar tone across the entire project. When I was working with these guys, we tried out every single guitar amp we had. We used my Kemper a bunch, and we tried a bunch of plugins, and we kind of went back and forth a million times. And even when it came to mixing, I was still tweaking stuff. And then this is what we landed on. So let me show it to you. We have a guitar stomp here, which has a compressor and the overdrive, which is basically like a tube screamer. Then that's going into this 11 light amplifier. And then after that, we just are cutting out some ugly frequencies and ugly digital top end. And that leaves us with... I can tell right off the bat that I didn't use an Evertune for this. We ended up using a Fender Mustang that sounded really good and a G&L Stratocaster-like guitar that sounded really good. They tuned to drop C sharp, and I think they learned pretty quickly that the string sizes they had on their guitar were not sufficient. So I made them go out and buy thicker strings, but the guitars that they had did sound really, really good. So we ended up using those. As I mentioned, this is the main guitar tone for this track as well as the entire EP. So if there's anything to take away from this, I would say to always record a DI, because there's sometimes in the moment where you think that the guitar sounds the way you want, but when you're trying to mix it all together, it's just not working. And I like to make decisions and commit to things, but sometimes having a little bit of flexibility does not hurt. So let's keep moving forward. We have this chorus guitar lead that reoccurs in the intro riff as well as the first real chorus, and the second and third chorus. But in the first chorus, I wanted it to be stereo, so I have them on 2 different tracks. It's the same riff and everything, but I just have them on 2 different tracks so I can affect them differently. So this is the main riff guitar lead. And then in the choruses, we have a guitar lead that's very similar, but it's panned out, so it's not in the center because there's actually vocals in this next part. So this is just to add some texture to the track. I know it's not really poking out too much, but it's just there to kind of add some texture to the guitars. And yeah, not too much to it. I think I threw a little bit of a delay on it. In green here, we have the verse rhythm, and this is actually really interesting how we tracked. So I'll play it and then I'll explain how we went about creating this. So you can tell that the performance is very clean. It is super polished. There's no mistakes in it. And how we did that is we actually took the performance and separated it into 2 pieces to give us maximum control over it. So you can hear that there's root notes, and then you can hear that there's harmonics. So what we did is we tracked the root notes, and then we tracked the harmonics, and we put the 2 pieces back together in post. A little bit of trickery, but you got to do what you got to do to get the best performances possible. And so let me play that again for you one more time, just so you can kind of hear that. So the root notes and the harmonics tracked separately and then put back together. That was pretty interesting, a pretty creative way to, again, get to the end result of having a really good take, which is all that matters. So let's keep moving forward. We have this other verse guitar that comes in halfway through, and I think this is just strumming chords. So all that's important here is getting these nice lush rakes. I believe we use my Kemper for all these verse guitar things. And then we have this, pre-chorus part here. And then after that, we have stereo acoustic guitars that were tracked by Evan, and he did a great job. What I like to do when I track acoustic guitars, when I want them to blend into a big, dense rock mix, is I will give the guitar player a very soft pick. So what that does is it makes it so the transients that are recorded aren't like super grabby. So it actually helps kind of like limit the dynamics on the way in. You can strum really hard, but it just ends up being this really nice, consistent strum. So then I can go ahead and I can dig into it and compress really hard going into it, and the 2 things together make it basically just sit exactly where I want in the mix. I'm doing some EQing, taking away some top. That's surprising. Normally you add some top. Cutting out a bunch of the body. The acoustic guitar is not the focus here, so it's okay to not have a ton of low end. I'm compressing some of the low end a little bit just to, again, get it to sit so it sits properly. Then I am compressing the entire track with an 1176 with a relatively faster attack than I normally would, and that is just to really keep those transients locked down. And then even on top of that, I'm throwing an L2 limiter on it. So I'm just trying to lock this thing in place, and it looks as though I'm using an Echo Boy. Oh yeah, I love this preset, the acoustic chorus. Throw this on acoustic guitars and they just sound vibey right off the bat. So these 2 acoustic guitars sound like this. You could argue that they're a little overcompressed, but it is what it is. Let's hear that all in context now. So So they're just there to add a bit of a percussive element with the strumming, as well as it reinforces the strumming pattern. It's so important that you line up your acoustic guitar strumming with the same strumming as the electric guitars, because once you have a bunch of different rhythms going, it's chalked. Your mix is a disaster mess. Okay, so that leads us to vocals, and the vocals are actually a lot more simple across these tracks, and there's not too much of a reason as to why. They just turned out that way. I found when I started in production, I would just overdo harmonies for no reason. I just felt like you had to, but now we do it a little bit more tastefully. So what I generally like to do when I'm working on vocals is I will track them and I will treat them as I go. So if I think it needs to be brighter, darker, I will do it. If I think it needs to be tuned, I will do it. If I think it needs some effects, I will put them on, and I really try and create a vibe right from the get-go. Try to get to that finish line, to that final product, so the artist knows exactly what we're doing, as well as it just kind of helps make decisions around the rest of the track as well. So I will go through, and this right here is our main kind of verse setting, and we have some EQ, adding some bright, adding a bunch of stuff to it actually. Compressing the low, I really like using this on the low end of vocals. De-essing, I like adding a little bit of limiting, and then I'm using the CLA vocals to just add a little bit of top. I really like the reverb sound on the CLA vocals, so I'm using a little bit of that, and that sounds like this.
I've got the shades drawn, the lights turned down low. I've been looking for some answers, nothing seems to make it through.
Mike's got a great voice. I know he was getting a little discouraged while we were tracking the whole EP. He was getting in his head, but I was like, dude, there's no way I'm going to make it sound bad. I'm just not going to let it happen. So trust me, we got this. And guess what? We got this. So what I'll do is I'll make that initial like vocal sound, and then I will just start manipulating it for different parts of the songs where I think it needs to be manipulated. So for example, we have that, but with an SSL EQ on it, cutting out all the bottom and all the top, as well as I took off the reverb to make it really dry. So that gives us this.
Take a breath, my flaws are in the open, and I've tried my best to fix the things I've broken.
What I really like to do here on vocals is I'll make a track called C Delay, which basically has the exact same effects, but then I'll just throw a half note or quarter note delay, whatever I think works. So if I want to make a delay throw, I can do it really quickly. Let's go here to this main verse vocal part, and then I can take that, I can just chop the audio. Did I line that up properly? Yes, I did. And I can put it on this delay track, and then let me play the two tracks together and see how this sounds.
If when I'm alone anymore.
Very simple, you get the idea. It leads to having a very fast workflow. That's what these C delay tracks are. There's one up here as well.
Every day I bend and then I break. Every night I just say they're wide awake.
Okay, so let's move forward to the chorus vocal here. And as you can see, we actually tracked a bunch of stuff, but I ended up cutting a lot of it out because I wanted certain parts to pop. And that was a decision I made during mix time, and I just rolled with it. So this is what we got.
Take a breath, my flaws are in the open, and I've tried my best to fix the things I've broken, 'cause I know I crack at the smallest bit of pressure, so I'll stay away, 'cause I'm not strong enough to leave this shelter.
We actually tracked the entire chorus all the way through. We have the one main vocal, and then we tripled that up. We did 3 layers of the main vocal, and then we did 2 layers of like a lower kind of talking octave just to kind of thicken it up. And I went through and I cut out everything except for these couple parts because I wanted them to pop. So let me play the entire mix with the vocals, and you can see how I came to that conclusion.
Hold me there until I can take a breath. My flaws are in the open, and I've tried my best to fix the things I've broken, 'cause I know I crack at the smallest bit of pressure, so I'll stay away, 'cause I'm not strong enough to leave this shelter. I need composure.
Okay, so you can hear, I mean, there's nothing too crazy to it. It's just trying to get those parts to pop out, make certain lyrics stand out. One thing I want to point out that kind of touches on something we talked about earlier is I have the lead guitar panned to the left, and then I have the tambourine panned to the right. Those two things kind of occupy similar frequency ranges, so I think that just goes to like the thoughtfulness that goes into the arrangement in the chorus to give every part its own space. That just stood out to me when I was listening to that. There's not too much I can think of in the vocals. We have the lo-fi vocal, we have the main verse. Oh, actually, here's something. So, let's go into, what's this part here? Second verse, part 2.
I know it's been beating on my habits. The moments linger endlessly, and I start to lose my balance again. Day I bend and then I break.
Okay, so that is the second verse going into, I guess, the second pre-chorus part. And what I did to make that transition feel better and feel fuller and more thought out is I actually created this harmony here on the end of the vocal using Melodyne. I took the main vocal and then I just like created a lower harmony out of it, which by itself probably sounds definitely messed up, but tucked in, no one would ever think twice about it. So let me play this and forever ruin this part for you.
Start to lose my balance again.
So that was made out of.
And I start to lose my balance again.
Together.
And I start to lose my balance again.
Whole track.
Moments linger endlessly, and I start to lose my balance again. Day I bend and then I break.
Sneaky stuff, but oftentimes if I'm working on a mix and I'm finding something just isn't sitting the way I want or it's not as effective, I will just go through and add it and hopefully no one gets hurt. Okay, so let's keep moving forward here. So lastly, let's talk about what I'm going to call the special effects or the production effects. So up first we have this little baby bass drop. All this is doing is just making the one hit harder. It's not trying to make this outrageous bass drop that is like next level. It's just to make that one hit.
Fix the things I've broken.
The goal is to make the bass drop not offensive in a track like this. Okay, we have a reverse swell. That sounds to me like a guitar strum. Yep, it sounds like I took that guitar strum, I reversed it, and then added a ton of reverb to it, and then reversed it again, and made a reverse swell reverb, which is a really nice transitional effect. And then on top of that, I also made 2 piano notes and did the same thing. Classic effect. Let's hear that all 3 together. And then in the track,
I need composure.
let me show you really quickly what this part of the song sounds like without any of my production effects on it. Okay, so this is removing the reverse guitar swell, the 2 reverse piano notes, the reverse cymbal, as well as this rim effects track that I created, and a vocal throw that was on this part. So this is what it sounds like without those production effects.
All this bit of pressure, so I'll stay away, 'cause I'm not strong enough to leave this shelter. I need composure.
Boring. Let me throw it all back in so you can hear the effects of cool production. Yeah, here we go. Check this out.
Strong enough to leave this shelter. I need composure.
That's called a good transition. That is why we do it. That is why we do it. Okay, let's keep on moving forward. So we actually have this little string part here. Let me play it in context so you can hear it. so you get the idea. I wrote this part out assuming that it was going to be like a gang vocal, like an ooh and ah part, things that I've done many, many times before that I think just add like a anthemic level to it. It is an instrumental part of the song, and there's no like lead. So I was like, guys, there needs to be something like taking the focus here. And so I wrote that out, and they're like, oh, those strings sound really cool. And I was like, okay. I thought it was going to be an ooh and ah part, but they're like, oh, but there's a part like that in another song. So we ended up just leaving it as strings, and I don't know. I think it's actually really cool. Just add some more tension to it. So crazy stuff. I don't know, there isn't really too much more to say about that, but that was a cool little part that we added there. And then lastly, the last little production effect is something that I've done a lot, and that is in verses or any part of the song where the dynamic really comes down, is adding like a freeze guitar that just kind of occupies space. It kind of works like a synth pad in a way, and it sounds like this. And you can hear it all over the track in any of the parts.
I know light and I know.
And yeah, we probably made that with a cathedral freeze pedal or a real freeze pedal. I don't actually recall how we did it. And then I threw a reverb and a gate on it to just give it some movement and some energy. Let's hear that in the track over here.
Out of sight, it's sitting deep behind the light, and I know it's been beating all my habits. The moments linger endlessly, and I start to lose my balance again.
And then it's also at the end of the song.
Long enough to leave this shelter.
Cool. Okay, so that is it for the tracks. I think I actually went through everything. This is the first time in the mix history that I do that. Normally I just kind of like group a bunch of stuff, so this might be a longer video. If you've sat through it, great job. Okay, let's go to our mix bus. That'll be the last thing we talk about, and let's see how much shady stuff I did on here. I started hitting it too hot, so I turned the trim down. Okay, classic. Use my go-to mix bus settings. Sometimes I'll switch the compressor I use, but I decided to use the Waves one on this. It sounded good, no issues. VTM, this is literally, you open up the settings and it ends up here. I've had this on my mix bus forever, and I don't know if it's doing anything, but it's definitely there. This is something that I've been doing for a long time, and I don't know if this is frowned upon at all, but I'll throw the mix to 50% on the JST clip, and I'll just start clipping it a little bit. Brings up the perceived volume a little bit and kind of clips some of the transients, makes the mix a little less dynamic and fatter. So oftentimes I'll leave that on, even when I send it to mastering. And then down here we just have a slate limiter. This is just for playback. I did not master this track, so when I sent off the mix bus probably had this off and might have even had the JST clip off. I'm not too sure, I don't recall. But yeah, that is Familiar Spaces in the open, in the mix. And this track, to me, there's a lot of things I did for the first time. Whenever I track drums in a small room, it's always a challenge to try and make the drums feel larger than life, but I think we achieved that. The bass guitar, that's the first time I've relied heavily on Melodyne to get the bass working and sounding good. And then also reamping it and using plugins as distortion pedals into an actual analog amp. It's really the synergy, the best of both worlds of analog and digital, using them without limitations. For the guitars, besides the intro guitar, I believe everything is an amp sim or a Kemper. And for the longest time, I've been a real amp guy just because I know real amps. I know how to make them sound the way I want. But on this track, I ended up using a lot more amp sims and the Kemper and digital stuff. And I have to say that I'll probably continue using amp sims and the Kemper and keep going into the digital world, because just the flexibility and workflow of using amp sims is great. And all in all, we have a nice emo rock song that is emotionally impactful. The production slaps, and I'm really glad that people that have listened to this track have enjoyed it. It's always nice to work on music and actually have people hear it. That is part of why we do it. So thank you very much if you've made it to this point in the video. If you've learned something along the way, that's really cool. Maybe let me know in the comment section down below what it is that you thought was interesting in this video. If there's anything you want to fight me on or you think that I should do differently, you can also let me know in the comment section down below. I'm going to plug a couple things here. If you plan on releasing new music anytime soon, consider using DistroKid. It's a great service. I use it for my side project. If you want to save money, you can save 7% by using my URL. Go to distrokid.com/VIP/whatsupnerds and you will save 7% when you sign up, which is very cool. It also supports the channel, which is also very cool. That's all I'm really going to plug in this video. Follow me on Instagram, Twitter, follow Familiar Spaces. Let's take over the world together. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Create more, create more, create more.